From now on, all you have left are your memories. My ex-wife said it, her voice sweet like honey laced with poison. The gavel slammed, and in a few seconds I lost everything: 3 houses, 2 cars, $9 million, and worst of all, the 2 children who once called me their hero. The woman whose hand I held for 35 years stood in front of me, arm in arm with her lawyer lover, smiling as if justice now belonged to her. No one knew that I simply smiled back. I didn't get angry. I just opened my phone and sent one message to myself: change grandfather Reginald's safe code. They thought I was cleaned out, shattered, finished. But they didn't know in that vault, dusted over for 7 decades, there wasn't just money. There was a verdict waiting to restore the honor of a man everyone thought had lost it all. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. My name is Harold Benton, 70 years old, born and raised in California. My life has been tied to blueprints, deals, and the old-school American dreams I believed you could build with 2 hands. I started from a small office with nothing but a beat-up wooden desk and a rotary phone, and slowly built Benton Realty Group, once ranked among the top 50 on the West Coast. I used to think success meant giving my family a comfortable life: 3 houses, 2 luxury cars, vacations in Hawaii, and dinners where my wife and kids' laughter filled every empty space. I'm not perfect, sometimes too strict, sometimes too trusting, but I always kept one thing: live straight, work honestly. I just never imagined the people I loved most would be the first to teach me that trust can have a price tag. I walked out of the Los Angeles courthouse that morning under sun so bright it stung my eyes. But the cold in my chest was sharper than any wind that ever crossed the Mojave Desert. Vanessa, my ex-wife, now the winner, clutched the arm of Trent Mallory, the young lawyer with slicked-back hair and a blinding smile of someone who knows he just stole a man's entire life. She didn't look at me again. She didn't need to. My life had been cut up, sealed, and split between them with a single ruling. I heard my shoes hit the marble steps, each heavy stride like walking over my former life. At 70, I thought I understood loss. Turns out, losing trust, losing the people who once called you family, is the slowest way to die. By afternoon, the headlines were already out, cold as ice. Businessman accused of emotional abuse, wife wins, takes all assets. My photo sat on the front page, caught in a hollow moment. Below it was Vanessa, blonde hair, black dress, diamonds on her wrist, the brave woman reclaiming freedom after 35 years in the shadows. I wanted to laugh. Freedom. She didn't seek freedom. She sought money, and she found it. My 2 children, Alyssa and Derek, chose to believe their mother. I still remember seeing them in the courtroom. Alyssa turned away, tears falling but refusing to meet my eyes. Derek, the young attorney, stood on Trent Mallory's side. The way he bowed to him like a colleague made my chest tighten. I taught that boy to draft his first legal brief, taught him that justice is something no one has the right to buy. But life taught him a different lesson, faster and crueler. When the court ruled, I just sat there. No arguing, no tears, no pleading. I figured if I opened my mouth, my voice would carry no weight anyway. The only thing I still owned was silence. That afternoon, I packed what was left in the house that used to be our home. 1 suitcase of clothes, a few notebooks, some old keepsakes, and the wooden box with grandfather Reginald Benton's mementos. I'd kept it like a nostalgic trinket, never once opening it. As I left, the old housekeeper avoided my eyes and whispered, "Good luck, Mr. Benton." I nodded. Luck? At my age, I don't believe in luck anymore. I rented a run-down apartment on the east side. Every night, the walls rattled when the train rolled by, and I'd think of those quiet family dinners. Vanessa laughing at the table, the kids fighting to tell their school stories. Now the room only had the ticking of a worn-out clock and the damp smell of old wood. I sat down and pulled the wooden box from my suitcase. Inside, besides a few black and white photos of my grandparents, was an old First National Trust passbook. The paper had yellowed, the corners were frayed. I opened it. Last deposit, $50, in 1949. I chuckled. Half a century later, that account had to be dust. But for some reason, I kept it anyway. Maybe because everything else had been taken, I clung to the smallest leftovers even if they were worthless. I couldn't sleep that night. Online, Vanessa posted photos of a victory party, warm golden lights, champagne flutes. The caption, "Justice always stands with the truth." Next to her, Trent smiled, his hand on her waist like he'd claimed the whole world. I stared at that photo for a long time, not angry, not hateful, just a sadness so deep it stole my breath. I'd built them a castle, and they burned it down with their own hands. I shut the laptop and poured a cheap whiskey. It burned down my throat, bitter and harsh. I wondered if old age is when you watch your life come apart and don't have the strength to shout. Then I thought of Grandfather Reginald's eyes in that faded photo, a man in a black suit, standing straight, gaze steady. He once told me, "Harold, honor is the last thing a man must never let anyone take." I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I knew what I'd do. The next morning, I got up early. For the first time in months, I shaved and pressed a white shirt. I slid my grandfather's old passbook into a leather folder with my ID's driver's license, birth certificate, Benton family records, everything that proved I was still me. I called First National Trust and asked about looking up an account from 1949. The young clerk sounded surprised. "The account may have been closed, sir, but if you have the original passbook, we can try." I smiled. "I still have it, and I carry the name Reginald Benton." Her tone shifted. "Please come to the main branch. We'll assist you." I hung up and stood. In the mirror, a 70-year-old man stared back, time-worn face, but eyes still holding a light that refused to dim. On the way to the bank, my old life slid by in the bus windows, streets where I used to own buildings, restaurants that once hosted my clients, signs that used to read Benton Realty Group. All of it belonged to someone else now, but I felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long while, I was chasing something no one could steal the truth. I arrived right at 9 a.m. The building was tall and modern, glass reflecting the deep California blue. I stepped into the lobby. My worn leather shoes clicked on the cold stone. A receptionist smiled. "Hello, sir. How can I help you?" I placed the passbook on the counter. "I'd like to check my grandfather's account. He opened it here in 1949. She frowned at the booklet like it was an artifact. "Yes, sir. Please wait a moment. I'll have the manager assist you." I sat, eyes drifting over people coming and going. They were here to deposit, withdraw, invest, borrow. I was here to see if my family's past still existed. I didn't expect much. If there were a few dozen dollars left, I'd buy myself a decent dinner, the most extravagant thing I could allow myself now. What I didn't know was that when the manager's door opened, the man who stepped out, face pale, voice slightly unsteady, was about to tell me my life would never be the same again. I wasn't born into comfort. My father was a mechanic in San Bernardino. My mother worked night shifts at a laundromat. I grew up in a rickety wooden house with a tin roof that rattled in the rain. At 22, I left home with $78, a torn suitcase, and a fuzzy belief that hard work would keep me from living like my parents. Back then, I knocked doors selling life insurance, something no one wanted, especially from a young guy in a borrowed suit and shoes 2 sizes too big. I walked more than 12 miles a day under the California heat, briefcase in one hand, hat shading my head in the other. I knocked on 100 doors, and 99 times I heard the usual lines. "Not interested. Don't need it, kid. Try somewhere else." But one person saying, "Tell me more," could carry me through the month. I still remember my first client, Mrs. Miller, 63, widowed, in a small house in Riverside. She bought a $2,000 policy simply because I patiently listened to her talk about her husband for 2 hours. She said, "You're patient and honest, that's why I trust you." I left her home and cried in the whirl, yard, not out of weakness, but because for the first time I knew how precious trust really is. I spent the next 5 years saving every commission dollar, living on canned pasta and cheap sandwiches. I didn't smoke, didn't hit bars, didn't take weekends off. At 30, I scraped together enough to open a tiny agency on Sunset Boulevard. I painted the Benton Insurance sign myself. The letters were a little crooked, but to me, it was a new chapter. Then opportunity came, not in a contract but in neighborhoods everyone called junk. In the late 80s, Los Angeles still had blocks of old, abandoned properties after a real estate crash. People stayed away, but I saw potential in those stained walls. I started buying houses for next to nothing, some for a few $1,000s, some for the price of a used car. I fixed them, painted them, rented them out. People laughed, called me crazy. A friend said, "Harold, you're burying money in rubble." 10 years later, those rubble piles turned into gems when the areas were redeveloped. Prices went up tenfold. I sold the first 3 and made over $400,000 in a single deal. By 50, I owned 3 homes in Santa Monica, Pasadena, and Malibu, drove a black Mercedes S-Class, and had more in the bank than my father made in his lifetime. But the thing I was proudest of wasn't money, it was family, what I thought was my true legacy. I met Vanessa at 35, at a client dinner. She wasn't like anyone I'd known. Soft brown hair, a smile so bright it drowned the noise around us. I remember that night, me, the awkward guy trying to impress, spilled red wine all over a white tablecloth. The whole table went quiet. Vanessa laughed. She said, "Finally, someone brave enough to break fake perfection." I looked at her, and in that moment, I knew my life just changed direction. We married a year later in a small ceremony by the beach. When I slipped the ring on her finger, I thought I was giving her my whole soul. She became the reason I worked around the clock, the person I wanted to share every win with first. 2 years later, Alyssa arrived, her mother's eyes, smart and kind. 3 years after that came Derek, quiet, bookish, with a tender heart. I remember the first day of school. Vanessa squeezed my hand and said, "See, this is the real achievement." I nodded. In that moment, I believed nothing could break this family. I worked like a madman in the years that followed, not out of greed, but to make sure my wife and kids never had to fear scarcity. I wanted them to have what I didn't: good schools, a sunlit home, summer trips, a mother at home, a father, steady as a rock. I taught my kids, money is a tool, honor is the foundation. I said it so often, Alyssa joked, "Dad, if you go into politics, we'll be your press team." I laughed, not knowing that one day those words would come back like a knife. Vanessa never had to do anything hard. I hired help, a driver, gave her everything she wanted, from a Tiffany necklace to a fall trip to Italy. I thought that was love. She saw it as entitlement. I didn't notice when she started changing. Maybe I was too busy, in too many meetings, or too sure that money could hold a person in place. Still, I considered myself lucky. Every time I came home to a lit kitchen and Vanessa's laugh, I believed we were fine. We argued sometimes, then hugged it out. On weekends, I'd take the kids to the yard to play ball, or we'd have dinner on the patio at sunset. I once told Derek, "Remember, peace of mind isn't for sale. Being a man means keeping your honor." He grinned. "Don't worry, Dad. I learned from the best." I didn't know that one day he'd stand in court and say, "He controlled my mother for 35 years. Sometimes I think I was naive to believe a decent life earns a decent ending. Life doesn't work that way. I'd built an empire, from nothing. But the easiest thing to collapse isn't assets, it's trust. And the one who smashed it wasn't a stranger, it was the person who whispered, "I love you," under this roof. I'd traveled a long road from the door-to-door kid under burning sun to the man with a house by the sea. I believed that if you live right and love true, you'll be repaid. But at 70, in an empty room staring at yellowed photos, I understand sometimes life doesn't pay fairly. Vanessa, the woman I once thought was a gift from God, turned out to be my final test. And she, along with that young lawyer, taught me an expensive lesson. Honor only proves its worth when someone tries to rip it from your hands and fails. 2 years before the divorce, I started noticing small things, little changes that seemed harmless but set off my gut. Vanessa talked more about work, about complicated legal procedures she needed help with, from attorney Trent Mallory, a name I'd never heard before. At first I didn't suspect a thing. I trusted my wife the way people trust breathing. But those meetings ran longer and came more often, and eventually they weren't work anymore. She changed her perfume from a light lavender to a strong, expensive scent you find in dim restaurants where laughter mixes with red wine. She bought new dresses, wore jewelry I'd never seen, and when I asked, she just smiled. "You're getting paranoid, Harold. Can't a woman dress up for herself?" I forced a smile. I was used to trusting, especially her. But once trust cracks, every simple answer feels like a tiny knife. I said nothing. I still waited up at night, set the table, asked, "How was your day?" She answered short and cool, then slipped into the study. Each night I heard typing and a soft laugh that no longer belonged to me. Then one night, everything collapsed. I wrapped a meeting early and decided to bring home her favorite dinner, honey-glazed salmon from the place nearby. It was cold and windy, and I felt happy we'd finally eat together without work in the way. When I walked in, the living room was dark, but light spilled from her study. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped. Vanessa's voice floated out, soft as velvet. "No, baby, he doesn't suspect a thing. When this is done, everything will be ours. I love you, Trent." I froze. I stood there like stone, gripping the paper bag until the salmon inside turned to mush. Every word hit me like a hammer. "I love you, Trent." I backed away, step by step, slipped out the hall and left the house. I didn't want to hear more. I didn't want to see the face of the woman who just betrayed 35 years of my life. I drove aimlessly. Los Angeles at night is cold and bright, but I saw nothing except lights bleeding together like wounds. I parked near the Santa Monica shore and sat until morning. Waves broke, birds called, but in my head there was only one sound, her voice. "I love you, Trent." I didn't rage. I didn't smash things. I felt empty. When feelings burned out, only the ash of logic remained. I understood. I needed proof, not emotion. The next day, I hired a private investigator. He was a retired cop named Ron Miller, short, gray-haired, gravelly voice, steady. I gave him addresses, schedules, photos. He looked at me and asked bluntly, "You want the truth or something easy to hear?" "I want the truth even if it kills me." He nodded. "All right, 3 weeks. Brace yourself." Those 3 weeks felt like 3 years. I lived like a ghost, still went to the office, still smiled at staff, but doubt buzzed in my skull. Each night Vanessa worked, locked her study, took calls about paperwork. I stood outside, hearing that soft laugh, the heavy perfume spilling under the door. I learned silence. Words meant nothing without proof. Ron came back right on time. He set a thick envelope on my table. No preface. I opened it. Photos dozens. Vanessa walking into a Beverly Hills hotel with Trent, hand in hand. Dinner by candlelight. The familiar smile that used to be mine. A kiss. Another shot of them signing transfer papers on an investment account in my name. Underneath were printed emails, texts, bank transactions, proof of not just an affair, but a plan to strip me of everything. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, an hour. My hands shook not from anger but from the feeling the world had cracked down the middle, and the woman I loved stood on the other side. The next morning, I set the breakfast table like always. When Vanessa came down, I laid the stack in front of her. She stopped, looked down. For a second, her face went white. Then she steadied, pulled out a chair, and sat like nothing had happened. She lifted her coffee, took a sip, and said gently, "Go ahead and sue. Trent has everything ready." I froze. She just called him by his first name, Trent. No more Mr. Mallory. No pretense of work. Just two accomplices discussing a finished game. I stared at her for a long time. Whatever was left in me showed in my eyes no hate, no grief, just absolute clarity. I said quietly, "Thanks for being honest." She smirked. "Harold, sometimes people have to take down a hero to survive. You wouldn't understand." I gathered every photo, every email, every line and walked away from the table. I knew this wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a war. The next day I got the divorce papers not from my attorney but from Trent Mallory, representing Vanessa. I opened them and read each line like reading my own obituary. She accused me of emotional abuse, financial control, forced signatures, years of restricting personal freedom, every count a bullet. I let out a dry laugh. Emotional abuse? They called my 18-hour workdays to pay tuition coercion, financial control. I asked her not to buy a fourth car when only two people were driving. Restricting freedom? She forgot she chose not to work, chose to live on my income. But to the court, paperwork is everything. And Trent knew that better than anyone. On the last page, one line chilled me. Temporary request to transfer asset ownership to the wife for her protection during proceedings. I understood. This wasn't a divorce. It was a carefully planned heist by the two people I once thought were closest to me. I closed the file and sat in the empty living room. Sunlight cut across the floor with a cold yellow glare. Vanessa's perfume still lingered in the air, a scent that now made my skin crawl. From that moment on, I wasn't a husband, a father, or a successful businessman. I was a target in a game drenched in money and lies. And if they thought I'd sit still until nothing was left, then they forgot that a man who once knocked 100 doors to sell insurance also knows how to knock on the gates of hell just to reclaim what's right. The day I walked into the first hearing, I didn't recognize my own life. A big room with a high ceiling, bright white lights washing over the faces of people who used to dine in my home now sitting on the opposite side. The air felt staged, like a play set up in advance, and I was the actor dragged into the villain's role. Vanessa walked in after me. She wore a long black dress and oversized sunglasses that covered nearly half her face, her softly curled hair neat like she'd just left a salon. She held Trent Mallory's hand, walking beside him like someone who needed to be led. The sight made the whole courtroom whisper, "Poor her." I sat at the defendant's table, listening to her heels skim the floor. When she removed her glasses, I saw eyes carefully made up with a touch of red at the corners, the mark of someone who knows how to summon tears on cue. The judge, a woman in her 50s with a cold, stern face, called the session to order. Trent stood, straightened his tie, and with a voice smooth as silk, he began to rewrite my entire marriage in front of the court. "Your Honor, for 35 years my client, Mrs. Vanessa Benton, lived under the psychological domination of a wealthy but cruel husband. He controlled the finances, isolated her from friends, forced her to sign papers without reading them, and threatened to cut off money if she didn't obey." I sat still, hands clasped. Every word felt like a drop of acid on my skin. He spoke for 40 minutes without stopping, every sentence neatly paced, every detail carefully embroidered. He built a perfect tale of decades of oppression, where I, Harold Benton, wasn't a man who worked his whole life for his family, but a controlling, domineering, unfeeling manipulator. When it was my attorney's turn, James Parker, a 40-year veteran, stood to rebut. He presented family photos, bank receipts, documents proving Vanessa had full withdrawal rights, her own credit cards, and 6 secondary accounts. He stated clearly, "Your Honor, Mrs. Vanessa is not a victim of financial control. She is the only one who overspent for the past 15 years. Mr. Harold Benton did not commit emotional abuse. He consistently provided his wife and children with a comfortable life." I looked up, a flicker of hope. Then Trent smiled and shot back in a hard tone. "These so-called proofs only show the surface. This is how controllers typically operate material generosity to hide emotional abuse." The courtroom buzzed. I saw the judge's eyes waver. Parker tried to continue, but his words hit a wall. Then came the witnesses. I thought someone would speak for me, a friend, a loyal employee, or at least our former housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, who lived in our home for 15 years. But when she took the stand, I couldn't believe my ears. She stood there, hands shaking around the microphone, and said, "Sometimes Mr. Benton lost his temper. Once I saw Mrs. Vanessa crying in a room, and he was yelling very loudly. I yelled because she spilled wine on a contract," I blurted. The judge banged the gavel in warning. "Defendant, maintain order." Mrs. Collins lowered her head, unable to look at me. In that moment I understood. They had bought everyone. Our former friends, the ones who toasted at our Christmas parties, were called one by one. They all said eerily similar lines. "Mr. Benton is controlling. He didn't let her have freedom. She lived in constant fear." I realized Trent had prepared this even more meticulously than I thought. Reporters in the back row started typing away. I saw one of them smile like they'd found a feast. The next day, headlines appeared everywhere. "Millionaire businessman accused of controlling his wife for 35 years. Courageous woman stands up to powerful husband. No one asked me a single question." In this world, people believe the one who can cry on cue more than the one who stays calm. Then it was my children's turn. I had braced myself, but when I saw Alyssa step onto the witness stand, hands trembling, eyes avoiding mine, I knew it was over. Trent asked her gently, as if consoling her, "Do you feel your mother was controlled by your father?" Alyssa choked up. "My father always decided everything. He told us we should be grateful, but he never asked what we wanted," I whispered. "Alyssa." She turned away, tears falling, and kept going. Derek followed. My son, the one I taught to tie a tie, now stood on the other side. "I love my father, but he tends to impose." My mother suffered in silence. I saw it. I looked at him without anger, just tired. Maybe Vanessa had talked to them for so long that every memory had been turned into a tool for her purpose. When Trent finished his argument, he glanced at me with triumph in his eyes. I didn't respond. I just sat straight, hands folded, and waited for the comp's final bang of the gavel. The judge read the verdict in a flat, emotionless voice. After reviewing all evidence, witnesses, and testimonies, the court finds that Mr. Harold Benton engaged in financial control, causing severe emotional harm to his wife. Therefore, all marital assets, including 3 homes and $9 million, are awarded to Mrs. Vanessa Benton. I felt the air in the room compress, heavy as lead. She continued. "In addition, the court recommends Mr. Benton undergo mandatory psychological counseling for 6 months and refrain from direct contact with his children until a new evaluation by a mental health professional." I heard the gavel hit the wood. Thump. It sounded like a gunshot ending my honor. No one said a word. Alyssa bowed her head. Derek turned away. Vanessa stood, pretended to wipe tears, then took Trent's arm and walked out. They moved slowly, as if afraid to step on their victory. I remained seated, motionless. Parker laid a hand on my shoulder and murmured, "We can appeal, Harold." I looked at him, my voice rough. "Appeal to whom, James? When justice has been bought." I stood. Every step out of that courtroom felt like dragging my soul behind me. Outside, reporters swarmed. Flashes popped non-stop. Someone asked, "Do you have any regrets, Mr. Benton?" I stopped and looked straight into the lens. "I only regret believing that marriage is protected by love and not by a contract." I cut through the crowd and descended the steps. The late afternoon sun lit the courthouse columns, a light that should have stood for fairness, but today it felt as cold as a blade. Just as I reached my car, I heard familiar heels behind me. Vanessa called out, "Harold!" I turned. She took off her sunglasses, her lips curling into a smile both arrogant and empty. "What do you have left, Harold?" I looked right at her, strangely calm. "You're mistaken, Vanessa. I still have myself, and that's the one thing you can never buy." That line was my declaration of self-respect. What do you think in this era? Is there still anything money can't buy? I truly want to hear your take in the comments. She hesitated for a second, then sneered and walked away with Trent. I opened the car door and sat inside. I felt hollow, but in that emptiness, a small flame sparked the flame of truth. Because I knew justice can be bought, but the truth cannot, and one day it would reclaim its value by my own hands. After that verdict, my life was chopped off like a dead branch. No more beachside mansion, no more luxury car, no more reputation, just a 70-year-old man standing in the wreckage of what used to be everything. I moved into a rundown apartment on the south side of Los Angeles, where the damp smell seeped into every breath, stained walls, wooden floors that creaked with every step like they were grieving, drafty windows, a cold wind sneaking in, and a weak yellow bulb flickering like it might go out just like the rest of me. The place had one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and an old armchair from a thrift store. It took me 3 days to clean the dust and trash from the previous tenant, and a week to get used to the noise from the neighboring buildings, crying kids, arguments, TVs blaring through the night. I used to live in a space of light, music, wine, and laughter. Now the only sounds were a ticking clock and my heart beat slow, heavy, sinking with each thud. Old friends vanished faster than a financial crash. On day 1, they texted sympathies. "So sorry, Harold. I can't believe it. You don't deserve this." By day 3, I called, no one picked up. In week 2, I tried again. Some sent me to voicemail. Others offered excuses. "I'm in a meeting. I'll call back." They never did. I get it. In the world of the wealthy, failure is the most contagious disease, and they're afraid of catching it. I tried calling Alyssa and Derek. I left dozens of messages, my voice trembling not from age but from fear. "Alyssa, I just want to talk. I didn't do what your mother says." No response. "Derek, can you meet me? Just once?" Silence. A week later, I received a single text from my son. "Mom's been through enough. I don't want to be manipulated anymore. Please don't contact me." One line like the final nail in the coffin of my trust. I read it over and over until I memorized every word, then deleted it. But deleting a message doesn't erase it from your heart. I still hear my own voice in sleepless nights. I just want to be believed one more time. I looked for work. I didn't need much, just something to give me a reason to leave that suffocating room. But when people saw the name Harold Benton, they immediately knew who I was. "I'm sorry, Mr. Benton, we can't hire someone tied to an emotional abuse case. You're too old to start over. We're afraid of media, attention." Each rejection was another cut into my pride. I used to manage hundreds of employees. Now I couldn't even get the night guard job at a supermarket. The day I received the last rejection letter, I sat all afternoon staring at my crookedly hung economics degree. That certificate once made me proud. Now it's just a relic of someone the world pushed aside. One October afternoon, I went to buy bread and instant coffee. While waiting to pay, a familiar laugh drifted from the steakhouse across the street. I turned and my chest clenched. Through the clear glass, Vanessa sat in a bright red dress, smiling wide, across from Trent Mallory in a deep blue suit. They raised their wine glasses, radiant, glowing, both of them living on my money. They ordered their main course. The waiter smiled and bowed. Candlelight reflected in their eyes the same light I used to call home. I stood across the street, swallowed by crowds, feeling like a ghost watching the life I lost. For a second, I wanted to storm in, scream, smash the glass, tell the world they were liars. But I stood still, because I knew no one would believe a man who had lost. I turned away. My steps felt chained. That night, for the first time in 40 years, I sobbed. Not because of the money, not because of my reputation, but because I realized a person can rebuild after losing everything unless they lose their faith in people. I sat on the floor among unopened boxes, tears soaking the old newspaper I'd laid under the table. I cried until I had no breath, then went quiet. At dawn, dim light seeped through the window. I looked around the messy room, family photos face down, an old suit hanging crooked on a chair, a newspaper headline, "Vanessa Benton Strong Woman Wins the Divorce of the Century." I laughed in the ashes. And then a thought flashed: if justice isn't given, I'll take it back myself. No one would save me. Not a lawyer, not my children, not my friends. I had one thing left: Will. And Will, I knew, was the only thing they hadn't stolen. I started cleaning the room, not to make it neat, but because I needed action to survive. I sorted old files, checked every financial record as if reassembling the fragments of a life. When I pulled the last drawer, I found a small wooden box, coated with dust. I recognized it immediately, Grandfather Reginald Benton's keepsake box. I sat and opened it. Inside were a few black and white photos, a pocket watch that had stopped, and an old passbook with a worn leather cover, First National Trust faded with time. I smiled bitterly. I vaguely remembered him saying long ago, "Harold, this is an account I opened in 1948. Keep it to remember that no matter what, you save a piece for the future." I'd kept that passbook for years, never thinking it was worth anything. The last time I saw it was about 30 years ago. I flipped it open. The last line read, "Balance, $50, September 12, 1950. I laughed out loud. $50, a number so small it felt mocking amid everything I'd lost. "Grandpa, if you were alive, you'd laugh at me too," I whispered. I planned to take it to the bank and close the account, like ending an old chapter of the family story. I wanted to wipe away memories tied to money, status, and that once proud lineage. But then, on the inside cover, I noticed a faint line I'd never paid attention to: automatic compounding interest. Do not close before the year 2050. I squinted, unsure I'd read it right. My heart gave a small thump. I grabbed my glasses and looked closely. That's exactly what it said. A glimmer tiny, but enough to warm my chest for the first time after months of darkness. I decided I'd go to the bank in the morning, not because I expected anything big, maybe just a few symbolic dollars in interest, but I wanted to close a circle to look straight at a past I had ignored. I folded the passbook and set it on the table, watching it sit quietly under the lamp. The brown leather was faded, but Reginald Benton was still clear. And I had no idea that what I thought was a meaningless trinket was actually a door to an invisible treasure a chance fate had set aside, waiting until I hit bottom to hand it back. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Los Angeles was chilly, a thin mist on the apartment window. I made instant coffee, put on an old coat, and carefully slipped Grandfather Reginald's passbook into my inner pocket. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a few dozen dollars in interest. Maybe a polite chuckle from a bank clerk at the antique I was bringing in. But I went anyway. Sometimes, a small reason to step outside is enough for someone surviving the ruins. I took the number 23 bus downtown. The First National Trust building still stood steady and cold like a memory. Gray granite facade, tall columns, a golden eagle crest gleaming in the sun. It looked just like the old photos in my grandfather's box. Walking into the lobby felt like going back in time. Young people in sharp suits hurried over marble floors, expensive perfume mixing with the tapping of leather shoes. I went to the front desk and handed over the passbook. "Excuse me, I'd like to check a very old account, from 1949. The young woman took it, glanced at the cover, then looked up, surprised. 1949. I don't think our digital system goes back that far, but I'll see what I can do. May I ask you to wait a moment?" I nodded. She disappeared behind a frosted glass door, leaving me standing in a wide lobby where everyone seemed to live in another world, a world where time still had value. About 10 minutes later, a middle-aged man appeared. Gray suit, silver-rimmed glasses, a kind face with the steady look of someone seasoned. He offered his hand. "I'm Joseph Lang, the branch manager. I think we should talk in private, Mr. Benton." I flinched slightly. I didn't remember saying my name. "You know me?" "The Benton family had a founding account here." "Reginald Benton, correct?" I nodded. He invited me up to a third-floor office with windows facing Wilshire Boulevard. He set the passbook on the desk next to a thick folder. "To be honest, Mr. Benton, I've never seen a case like this." I raised an eyebrow. "That account must have been closed long ago, right?" Joseph shook his head. "No, it's still active. And not just active. It has grown." He turned the monitor toward me. My eyes blurred not from age but from the number on the screen. $127,463,902.18. I thought I was seeing things. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Same number. $127 million. "This is compounded interest from 1949 until now," Joseph said softly. "Under a special fixed rate your grandfather arranged for a generational account." My mouth opened but no sound came. My head spun. For years I believed I'd lost everything. And now, in one morning, life handed me the impossible. Joseph walked to a safe, opened it, and took out a red wax-sealed envelope. He handed it to me carefully. "This was left by your grandfather with the account. The file says, 'Deliver only to a direct descendant who is in a state of complete loss.'" I took it with trembling hands. The red seal was intact, stamped R.B. for Reginald Benton. I opened it. Inside was a letter in crisp black ink, firm handwriting. "Dear Harold, if you're reading this, the time has come. In life, there are moments when a person is stripped of everything: assets, reputation, love, and trust. But remember, the wicked can only steal what they can see. Honor and wisdom they can never touch. This account isn't a reward. It's a reminder. All material things are temporary. If you keep yourself intact, time will return everything. Be kind, but don't let others exploit your kindness." At the bottom, he signed, "Reginald Benton, 1949. I folded the letter, tears hitting the desk. I had lost faith in justice and people. But it turned out my grandfather, gone for half a century, was still seeing me from the other side of time. Joseph stayed quiet, then said, "Mr. Benton, this account remains your legal property under absolute confidentiality. We just need your signature to transfer it to a current account." I held the pen, my hand still shaking. "No one else knows about this?" "No," Joseph said. "Just you and me. And per the founder's request, the file will be sealed." I signed. Each stroke felt like carving my honor back into place. When we finished, Joseph shook my hand and spoke softly. "Mr. Benton, I don't know what you've been through, but it seems fate just gave you a second chance. Don't waste it. I left the bank gripping the red-sealed envelope. The sun felt lighter on my face. Traffic still sped by. People still hurried. But I felt like I was walking in a different world, one where time had finally paid back what it owed. I didn't splurge. I didn't buy a mansion or a luxury car. I rented a slightly nicer, clean apartment, bought an old used car, and replaced my clothes with something decent. I lived simply, like any retiree. No one knew the man brewing coffee each morning and taking evening walks had more than $120 million in his account. I knew this. If money once made me lose everything, this time it would help me reclaim my honor. I started looking for someone who could help me strike back not with fists, but with the law and the truth. Through an old contact of Joseph's, I found Robert Bob Kingsley, a lawyer who had retired early, known as the ghost of the courthouse, specializing in legal fraud and judicial corruption. He'd won cases people thought were unwinnable, and the system hated him for being too honest. We met at a small cafe in Burbank. He was about 75, silver hair, calm and bright eyes. "I read your case, Harold," he said after I finished. "You didn't lose because you were wrong. You lost because you believed the courts were still fair." I stayed quiet. He gave a slight smile, his voice raspy but firm. "I've seen many people buried by dirty verdicts. But you're different. You still have what they didn't, the reason to fight." We shook hands. I looked into his eyes and understood. My silent counterattack had just begun. I told no one. I didn't re-register the company, didn't talk to the press, didn't contact my children. I just quietly gathered information, backed up every old document, looked for errors in the divorce case file, and collected evidence that Trent Mallory bribed the witnesses and tampered with testimony. I lived like an ordinary man, but day by day, hour by hour, I was digging a grave for the truth. Someone once said, when a person hits bottom, they have only two choices: die or become someone else. I chose to become someone else. Not Harold Benton, the businessman, husband, father, but Harold Benton, the survivor. And this time, I wouldn't let justice be bought again. When Robert Kingsley agreed to help me, he didn't act right away. He said, "Harold, in a predator's game, the one who moves first usually loses. Your job now is to be silent and watch." So I learned to be silent once more, but unlike the hopeless silence before, this time it had a purpose. Robert began assembling a small team. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just 5 people, but each one a precise puzzle piece in the picture of justice he planned to redraw. First was Martha Ellison, a private investigator who'd worked with the FBI, snow-white hair and a mind sharp as a blade. She spoke with a slow southern drawl, but she could pull information out of any system. Second was Eli Zhang, a Taiwanese-born data analyst, looked like a freshman, but could trace any bank transaction from a single misplaced comma. Third was Dwayne Collins, a signature authentication expert who'd worked in the Department of Justice's anti-fraud unit. And the last, a young woman named Sophie, 29, in charge of gathering and encrypting documents. Robert said she had a gift for hearing what people don't say. Looking at them, I felt like I was seeing a small version of a justice squad the world had forgotten. Robert divided tasks precisely. No one knew the full plan except him and me. "First target," he said, "is Trent Mallory. But to take him down, we have to understand how he hunts." We started with his public records divorce cases, wealthy female clients, verdicts that were suspiciously favorable. Martha collected documents for 2 months, and one morning she set a file on the table as thick as a dictionary. "At least 7 women hired Trent as their lawyer," she said, "and they all share the same pattern. They win, take everything. Then a few years later, they disappear." Eli combed through those women's financial transactions, and the results stunned the whole team. 6 out of 7 transferred money through a shady investment fund called Westbridge Holdings, a company registered to an entity in Belize. CEO, Trent Mallory. Robert smiled the smile of someone who just watched the prey step into the trap. He's not just a lawyer, Harold. He's a legal predator. And Vanessa is just one of his biggest catches. Piece by piece, the details clicked into place. Hotel photos, airline receipts, emails between Trent and former clients. Sophie recovered everything, line by line, word by word. A few victims still kept his love letters so sweet they made you believe romance could bloom in a courtroom. Robert carefully reached out to each one. At first, they were afraid. No one wanted to reopen the past, much less face off against a wealthy, dangerous attorney like Trent. But Robert had his way. "No one is forcing you to fight," he told them, "but if you stay silent, he'll do it to someone else." A month later, 3 agreed to testify, then 2 more, then 6. For the first time in years, Trent Mallory's victims dared to stand up. We gathered nearly 200 pages of evidence wire transfers, fake investment contracts, certificates for dummy accounts. Everything fit together as if he had written the script for his own downfall. As for me, during that time I lived quietly like a gentle old man. Each morning I walked around Echo Park Lake, fed the birds, and chatted with a few new neighbors. No one knew I'd once been Harold Benton, the man on business magazine covers. I was just Mr. Harry, the guy who brought bread for the pigeons and smiled when the wind changed. But inside, I always kept an eye on my 2 children, even if they no longer called me Dad. I watched from a distance, not with hatred, but with a deep, aching tenderness. I knew Vanessa had made them believe I was a monster, and I didn't blame them. Sweet lies are easier to swallow than bitter truth. One day, Martha brought news. Alyssa is in trouble at the hospital where she works. Her superior is harassing her, but she's afraid to report it because she might lose her position. I listened, and my heart twisted. She'd been my pride, the top resident at UCLA that year. I couldn't watch her be hurt again. I asked Robert to contact an old acquaintance in the press who owed me a favor. A week later, Alyssa's superior was under investigation for misconduct, and my daughter was transferred to a new department, safe and respected. She had no idea. She just posted a short line online. Maybe there are still good people in this world. I saw it, and for the first time in years, I truly smiled. Derek was different. He started his own law firm after the divorce case, but the finances were bleak. I knew it wasn't because he lacked skill, but because the Los Angeles legal world is brutal, especially when people know you're the son of the millionaire abuser from back then. One night I heard his firm was about to go under. I sat in the dark for a long time, then decided. I formed a shell investment company under the name Helios Group as a Swiss investor. I lent Derek $500,000 to save the business, but required him to keep the investor's identity confidential. 3 months later, his firm recovered. I read his interview in California Legal. I can't reveal the name of the investor who saved us, but thanks to him, I learned that sometimes opportunity comes from where you least expect it. I looked at the photo, my son's smile, confident and grown, and thought, if only they knew who that anonymous investor was. 6 months passed. Robert's team and I worked quietly, meticulous to the last detail. On his desk, files lay in neat stacks, numbered and sealed. File No. 1. Evidence of financial fraud. File No. 2. Evidence of witness manipulation. File No. 3. Belize account links. File No. 4. Victim testimonies. And finally, File No. 5. Vanessa Benton, the key witness who'd been deceived. I held that file in my hands, feeling the weight of my whole past. Each page was a scar, but also a blade of justice, sharpened by patience and pain. Robert looked at me, calm, eyes bright. "It's time, Harold." When a predator thinks he's at the top of the food chain, that's when he's standing on the trap. I nodded. 6 months in hiding. 6 months of silence. 6 months of gathering the fragments of truth. Now it had all taken shape. I looked out the window. The sunset sky blushed red, clouds drifting like silent witnesses to a life. In my heart there was no hatred left, only the calm of a man who's risen from the bottom and knows he's about to walk straight into the light. That night, Malibu's shoreline glowed like a small kingdom. From afar, I could still recognize the mansion that used to be mine, the place where I'd laid the first bricks, where every corner still held the laughter of my wife and kids from long ago. Now it blazed with lights, music swelling. On the front gate, a bright LED sign. Love Anniversary, Vanessa and Trent Mallory. I watched it on my phone screen, the glow reflecting across my face like an old scar. My mansion now a stage for the fake love of two people who use the law to take everything. Robert and his team had planned for 3 weeks. Everything had to be precise to the minute, to the move. No gunshots, no chaos, only the truth delivered clean and sharp as a scalpel. Martha and 2 agents from a federal task force went in undercover as servers. They wore tiny earpieces and signal watches. Eli and Sophie were at the control center, handling data flow and ready to transmit commands. And me, I wasn't there. Robert said, "Harold, you don't need to witness their fall. A true winner never has to watch an enemy kneel. You just need to know justice is turning back to its path." I listened. But that night, I still sat up, turned on a small lamp, and made tea. Some things you're meant to feel in silence rather than see with your own eyes. The party started at 7:30 p.m. On the ocean-facing terrace, string lights hung like stars, champagne filling flutes. Vanessa wore a red satin gown, her hair in soft waves, a diamond necklace I had given her for our 20th anniversary around her neck. Trent wore a tuxedo, smiling smugly like the world was already his. Guests were rich folks, lawyers, business owners, a few familiar media faces. Everyone raised a glass, said pretty words. Vanessa smiled. No trace of the woman who once told me, "From now on, all you have is memory." I sat in my small apartment, warm yellow light pooling on the wall. On the table, my phone was on silent, only flashing new notifications by the minute. 8:47 p.m. A text from Robert. "Everyone in position." I set down my teacup, my heartbeat keeping pace with the seconds on the clock. 8:59 p.m. Another message. "Go." At exactly 9 p.m. 3 black police cars stopped at the mansion gate. Blue and red lights washed over the ocean, reflecting in strange streaks, beautiful and frightening. The soft jazz froze. For a few seconds, no one understood what was happening. Then the gate opened. 12 federal officers entered, uniforms crisp, flashlights cutting through the crowd. A female officer spoke. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have arrest warrants for Trent Mallory and Vanessa Benton for financial fraud, document forgery, conspiracy to misappropriate assets, and legal manipulation." That voice, rising over the waves and the wind, sliced the party's glossy air in two. A guest champagne flute hit the ground and shattered. The sound of glass on tile was as cold as a drum roll for collapse. Vanessa froze for a few seconds, then sprang up, her voice shaking. "You've got the wrong people. This is a private event." Trent stepped forward, trying to keep his composure. "I'm Attorney Mallory, and I demand to see the arrest warrants and specific grounds." An officer held out a thick, red-stamped folder. "Mr. Mallory, we have full evidence your financial transactions, 7 former victims, the Belize account, and proof of falsified filings in California State Court." Trent's face went pale. He stepped back. "This is a mistake. I can explain." "You'll have a chance to explain in court," the officer said, then gave the signal. 2 silver cuffs flashed in the light. The click sounded dry and final. They restrained Trent in the middle of the crowd's noise, his face twisting in panic he could no longer hide. Vanessa stood frozen, lips trembling, eyes wide, looking around. She called out, "Alyssa, Derek, where are you?" No one answered. She called again, voice hoarse. "Kids, help me!" But my children weren't there. They were at home, safe, and probably watching the live news like thousands of others. A few guests pulled out phones to record. They'd come to flaunt status, and ended up witnessing two liars being cuffed under glittering lights. The videos spread within hours, the headlines short and cold. Famed lawyer and mistress arrested during love anniversary party. At the same time, I sat in my old armchair in the small apartment, the desk lamp throwing a warm glow. On the table, the teapot had gone cold. My phone buzzed. "Robert," I picked up. "It's done, Harold. He's in cuffs, and so is she." "Thank you, Robert." "No thanks needed. I just did my part. You kept your vow to yourself. No hate, only the truth." I was silent. Outside, the wind pushed through the small window frame, carrying the ocean's chill. Robert added, "There's something you should know. One of the officers who took them in was your son, Derek." I paused. Robert continued, "He doesn't know who orchestrated this." But when he saw Trent in cuffs, I saw more than shock in his eyes. There was relief. I slowly closed my eyes and sighed. A single tear rolled down my cheek. That night, I didn't go out. I just sat and watched my reflection in the window. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock's tick-tock, like it was counting each moment of justice returning. I didn't feel joy, didn't feel triumph. Only one thing, peace. Peace, like the world had finally agreed to listen to my story, even if late. I lifted the cool cup and took a small sip. The bitterness spread across my tongue, but strangely, it warmed me. Maybe justice is like tea. It never forgets anyone. It just sometimes arrives later than we hoped. 3 days after the arrests, Robert called me. His voice was low and steady, but I could hear the excitement he tried to hold back. "Harold, it's time. We're going to overturn the verdict." I sat up straight. For 2 years, I'd trained myself not to hope, but this time, in his voice, I heard the truth. Robert and his team had prepared a file over 300 pages thick. All of it was evidence of procedural fraud. Emails between Trent and the former judge. Bank records of anonymous donations Vanessa sent to an intermediary account. Testimonies from former victims, all showing the same pattern. Lightning-fast wins thanks to orchestration. Robert didn't just intend to prove I was innocent. He wanted to prove the system had been manipulated. The hearing was reopened on a Monday morning at the Los Angeles Superior Court. No more cold stone columns making me shiver, like before. This time, I walked in differently, not as a defendant, but as a man reclaiming his name. The new courtroom felt brighter, cleaner, and most important, a new judge. She was a woman around 60, hair streaked with silver, eyes stern but not cold. Before we began, she spoke slowly. "Mr. Benton, we've reviewed your file. This court commits to a fair proceeding without prejudice." I nodded. That alone made my heart feel lighter. Robert began. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. He didn't tell a story. He redrew the entire truth layer by layer, detail by detail, like a man untangling a knot tied far too tight. On the screen, emails appeared. "She deserves more, and I can help as long as your side helps me." Signature, Trent Mallory. Next came the transfer evidence, dozens of transactions between Vanessa and the former judge's account, disguised as contributions to a legal fund. Behind us, Trent's other victims sat in a row. Each one had a story, but when they stood together, they weren't victims anymore. They were witnesses for justice. Miss Linda Howard, 54, who lost everything in a 2015 divorce, held the mic with shaking hands. I don't know Mr. Benton, but when I heard his story, I knew I wasn't alone. Trent Mallory used the same trick, said I was emotionally abused, pressured me to sign papers I later learned were fake. Then another spoke, and another, all six. Each confirmed they were deceived, guided, and made to believe justice stood with them when in fact it was a filthy game. Vanessa wasn't present. She was still in custody awaiting investigation. Trent, in cuffs, sat in the back, silent. His face was gaunt, hair disheveled, the confidence gone from his eyes. Maybe for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to sit on the wrong side of the law. When Robert finished, he said just one line, "Your Honor, Mr. Harold Benton is not here to ask for money. He's here to take back his name." The courtroom went dead quiet. I heard my heartbeat slow, but strong. The judge called a 10-minute recess for the panel to deliberate. I stepped into the hallway. Sunlight streamed through the windows, throwing a warm glow on the stone floor. Robert joined me and said softly, "Whatever the outcome, you've already won, Harold, because you kept your dignity." I nodded and smiled. After everything, I understood that winning isn't about crushing others, it's about still being yourself after the storm. When court resumed, everyone held their breath. The judge opened the file and spoke clearly, each word crisp. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimony, and verified materials from the Department of Justice, the court declares the 2023 divorce judgment between Harold Benton and Vanessa Benton void due to procedural fraud. The court orders the return of all assets, including 3 houses, vehicles, and the sum of $9 million to Mr. Harold Benton. Additionally, the court orders a criminal investigation into the former judge for indications of negligence and bribery. The gavel struck. Thump. One sound and I felt the past washing clean. I closed my eyes and exhaled deeply. The courtroom erupted in applause. A few people stood. I saw tears that couldn't be held back, not mine, but from those who still believed justice exists. 3 days later, headlines ran everywhere. Power attorney exposed large-scale legal fraud unmasked. Businessman Harold Benton exonerated, regains honor and assets. For the first time in 3 years, my name appeared in the news without the word abuse. I looked at the paper, my hands trembling slightly. Not from emotion, but because that feeling being seen as myself again was too vast for words. That afternoon, Alyssa came by. She knocked on the door of the small apartment where I still lived. When I opened it, she stood there thinner, eyes red. "Dad." I stayed silent. She choked up. "I'm sorry. I believed the wrong thing for 3 years. I don't deserve to call you that." I looked at my daughter, the pride of my life now trembling in the doorway. I didn't say a single word of blame. I just stepped forward and held her. "Sweetheart, it isn't your fault. Some words are designed to be believed. As long as you've come back, that's enough." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking in my arms. In that moment, I felt the one thing money can't buy: forgiveness. 2 days later, Derek came by. He didn't say much. He simply set an envelope on the table. I opened it. It was a copy of the investment contract from Helios Group. He looked at me, lips pressed tight. I figured it out. The investor who saved my firm. It was you, wasn't it? I smiled. "Yes." He gave a small laugh, tears falling. "I used to think you hated me." "No," I said. "I was only sad that you believed I was capable of something that awful. But remember, trust doesn't just come back on its own. You rebuild it, brick by brick." He nodded and bowed deeply to me. In his eyes, for the first time in years, I saw the man I once taught to tie a tie for his first day of school. All the assets were returned to me within 2 weeks. 3 houses, 2 cars, and $9 million. Everything went back under the name Harold Benton. But I didn't move back into the oceanfront mansion. I just sent someone to clean it. then closed it up and left the keys in an envelope. I chose to stay in the small apartment, the place where I hit bottom and where I found myself again. That night, I turned off my phone and brewed a fresh pot of tea. Outside the window, the city lit up. Far-off waves blended with the wind's slow breath. For the first time in 3 years, I slept in peace. No courtroom in my dreams, no betrayal, no sound of a gavel, only stillness, gentle, clear, and true. I knew the storms had passed, and the name Harold Benton, the man once slandered and stripped bare, had finally been restored. After I got everything back, money, homes, honor, and my children, I thought I'd feel lighter. Strangely, the first feeling was emptiness. I sat in the mansion by the sea, the one that had hosted so many noisy parties, and felt like I was inside a shell. Everything around me, Italian leather sofas, crystal glasses, oil paintings, was just memorabilia from days built on lies. So I started clearing out the memories. Item by item, photo by photo, every bit of decor tied to that past I gave away or sold for cheap. I kept only what belonged to my parents, to my grandfather Reginald, and a few pictures of my children when they were little. I hired painters to redo the entire house, not Vanessa's cold white tones, but a warm beige with soft light. The smell of fresh paint mixed with wood made the house breathe again after years trapped under a glossy shell. I changed every lock, not because I feared anyone returning, but because I needed to close the old door of my life for good. One morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, I sat at my grandfather's desk, the oak one he used in the 1930s, and thought, I can't take $127 million to the grave, but maybe I can take something bigger, meaning. I called Robert over. He still wore that familiar gray suit, calm face, eyes bright as the first day we met. Robert, I want to do something, so my fight doesn't end with a verdict. He gave a small smile. What are you thinking, Harold? I want to start a foundation in my grandfather's name, the Reginald Benton Foundation. The goal? To help people who were cheated in divorce, manipulated by the legal system, turned away by the institutions, the way I was. Robert sat quietly for a moment. He looked out at the ocean and nodded. If you're serious, I'll stand with you. I gripped his hand, a handshake between two men who had walked through hell and were now set on rebuilding a piece of heaven. I put in an initial $20 million, enough to run the foundation for at least 3 years without outside funding. Robert became chief legal officer, in charge of strategy. I hired our first team of 15, young attorneys, investigators, financial specialists, and people who had once been victims and now wanted to help others. Our first office opened in Los Angeles, in a small but welcoming building. I designed the space myself. No giant wood desks, no towering glass doors, just bright rooms and a motto from my grandfather on the wall. Justice is not a privilege, it's a duty. And so we began. The first case files came from people crushed by a cold legal machine. Some were swindled out of everything by a spouse. Some lost their children because the other side bought off a lawyer. Some, like me, were labeled controlling simply because they didn't know how to defend themselves. I read every letter, every message. Some nights I stayed up until 3 a.m., too restless to sleep. In those words, I saw my old self alone, desperate, forgotten. The first case our foundation took was Gloria Matthews, 42, a small flower shop owner in Bakersfield. Her husband, also her business partner, had secretly transferred all company assets into his name, then filed for divorce, tossing her out with nothing. When Gloria came to us, she was shaking, unable to believe someone would actually help. Robert just smiled. Let us handle it. We investigated and discovered her husband had colluded with a bank official to forge signatures on the transfer documents. Dwayne, the signature expert, found proof that couldn't be denied. A fake hand, a seal offset by just over 1 millimeter compared to the original. 6 months later, Gloria won. She got her flower shop back, her home, and her honor. I remember the day she came to the office with a bouquet of red roses. She cried, saying, "Mr. Benton, thank you. Because of you, I have my life back." I answered, "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for believing you deserve protection." When she left, I looked at the roses on my desk and thought, every victory isn't just a case closed, it's a social wound stitched up. We opened additional offices in San Diego, Sacramento, Phoenix, Denver, and Dallas. Each location had its own team of attorneys, investigators, and financial experts. Robert joked, "I once promised I'd retire quietly. Now I'm leading a team of 200. I laughed. "You're doing what real justice needs." The media started paying attention. At first, small pieces. Reginald Benton Foundation, a place where the powerless find their voice. Then bigger stories. Man once falsely accused builds a legal force to help others reclaim justice. One TV channel even called me the father of civil justice. A reporter asked, "Do you see this as revenge, Mr. Benton?" I smiled at the camera. "I don't take revenge. I restore the balance." The line spread so quickly it became the foundation's motto. Every time we won a case, the staff wrote it on the whiteboard. "We don't take revenge. We restore balance." 3 years passed. The foundation grew beyond expectations. We handled over 400 cases, helped hundreds reclaim assets, protect their names, and regain faith in justice. Many who once didn't dare speak now stood tall in court. I still live simply. Each morning I walked the shore, stopped by a small cafe, read the paper. People recognized me, shook my hand, and called me Mr. Benton, the man who fought the system. I only smiled. I'm not fighting the system. I'm reminding it that justice exists to serve people. One evening, while Robert and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, he asked, "You've never thought about resting?" I shook my head, eyes on the sea. "When I die, the money will be gone. But if I help others learn to stand, that will outlive me." He was quiet for a while, then smiled. "I believe you. And I believe this foundation will help many more." The sea breeze carried salt and memories. I looked out at the sinking sun and felt a deep calm. I once thought freedom meant money, houses, and reputation. Now I know, true freedom is living to give, because only then do you stop fearing loss. One early fall morning, with mist still whitening the window frame, I received a tan envelope stamped by a California state prison. I didn't need to open it to know who sent it. Vanessa Benton was neatly written in the corner, the same handwriting from those birthday cards she wrote me for 30 years. But this time the letters trembled, not as sure as before. I poured a cup of coffee, sat at the oak table by the window, and slowly opened the letter. The smell of old paper mixed with coffee, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "Harold, I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness, and I'm not writing to justify anything. I only want to say I destroyed the best thing in my life. I can't blame anyone, not even Trent. I chose that road, and I'm paying for it. You once said, 'Honor is the only thing no one can take from you.' I laughed back then. Now I understand, because losing honor is the real punishment. I hope you are happy. I don't deserve to call you my husband, but I have always known you are the most honorable man I've ever met. No tears, no pleading, no emotional bribery, just a letter bare and quiet." I folded it and set it on the table. The morning light fell across the page, showing the creases in the corners, maybe where her hand shook as she wrote. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say, and nothing I needed to hear, but I kept the letter, not as a relic of love, but as proof of a late awakening. Trent was sentenced to 20 years for financial fraud, falsifying records, and legal manipulation. Vanessa got 8 years, with possible reduction for good behavior. I attended every hearing, not to watch them fall, but to close a chapter that had gone on too long. When the judge read the sentences, I felt no triumph. Only a vast emptiness inside where rage used to live now, just fatigue and peace. Robert asked me after the final hearing, "Harold, don't you feel victorious?" I gave a small smile. I didn't come to win. I came to finish. Time passed. Life found its rhythm again. Alyssa and Derek, after many hesitant starts, finally asked me, "Dad, can we come for dinner?" I paused a few seconds before answering. "Of course. There's always a place for you here." That evening, I made pot roast and toasted bread, their childhood favorites. When they walked in, the house felt young again, laughter, chairs sliding, the clink of cutlery. Familiar, sounds we'd missed for too long. We ate in silence for a while, then Derek said, "Dad, I'm sorry." I set down my spoon and looked him in the eye. "I know," Alyssa added, voice shaking. "Me too. I still don't understand how you can not hold a grudge." I smiled, watching the candlelight flicker on the table. "Because resentment only makes us grow old." "And forgiveness?" Alyssa asked. "Forgiveness makes us come back to life." No one said anything more, only the distant sound of waves. In the warm light, I saw them glance at each other and nod. Maybe they were learning to forgive themselves too. From that day on, we saw each other more often. Not to make up for lost time, but to be present. Alyssa brought flowers every weekend. Derek sometimes helped me review the foundation's finances. Both of them said, "Dad, you didn't just get your honor back, you taught us what it means to be a decent person." I just smiled. They didn't fully understand yet, but sooner or later, life would teach them. That winter, I received a second letter from prison. Same handwriting, but shorter, tighter. Just one line. I read about the Reginald Foundation. "If possible, I want to donate what remains of my assets to those I hurt. I'm not seeking redemption. I just want to do one last right thing." I read it, folded it, didn't reply. But this time, I didn't feel cold. I just thought, maybe, finally, she found a way to survive inside the truth. One afternoon, I sat with my two children on the balcony, pale sunlight crossing the table. Alyssa asked, "Dad, if you could go back, would you do anything differently?" I smiled. "No, because without that fall, I wouldn't have learned to stand up and do what's right." Derek looked at me, serious. "Dad, I think justice can be late, but in the end, it still comes, doesn't it?" I nodded. "Justice is late, but it comes for sure." "And love?" Alyssa asked, softly. I was quiet for a moment, then answered, "Love is different. It doesn't come because we want it. It comes because we're ready to give." That night, after they left, I went into my study and opened an old drawer. Inside were two letters, one from my grandfather Reginald, written to me when I was young, one from Vanessa, sent from prison. I placed them side by side, folded them gently, then smiled. One letter taught me about honor. One letter taught me about remorse. Both, from different eras, reminded me of the same thing. True strength isn't in striking back, it's in forgiving without forgetting. I closed the drawer, turned off the light, and stepped onto the porch. Outside, the night sea lay still, the moonlight stretched like a silver ribbon. I stood there a long time and felt something clear. No matter how broken life gets, it can be pieced back together if we're brave enough to forgive. And that night, as the wind moved lightly through my gray hair, I said softly to myself, "Thank you, Vanessa. Because of you, I learned what true freedom is." A year after the verdict was voided, the Reginald Benton Foundation was no longer small. It had become a movement. We didn't just help victims case by case, we started pushing for policy so the legal system would change at its roots. Robert and a team of young attorneys put forward a bold proposal. Every divorce involving assets over $1 million must be independently audited by a financial and legal panel separate from both parties. That meant no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, could easily manipulate the scales of justice, the way Trent Mallory once had. I remember Robert setting the proposal on the table and saying, "This is the wall that protects people like you, Harold. More importantly, it protects those who've never had a voice." I nodded. I understood, because I had once been one of them. The advocacy campaign lasted nearly 6 months. We sent petitions to the state senate, held forums, did media interviews. Plenty of people opposed us because a new law would close many lucrative loopholes in the legal field. But just as many stood with us. Those who had been cheated, pushed aside, stripped of their voices, they stood up, told their stories, signed their names, and turned pain into power. When I heard a middle-aged woman say on camera, fighting tears, "If this law had existed in 2018, I wouldn't have slept in my car for 2 years," I knew we were on the right path. That April, the governor of California signed the bill. On TV, the crawl read, "The Benton Act, a law protecting fairness in high-asset divorces." I sat in my study, seeing my name on the screen, not sure whether to laugh or cry. I had never dreamed I'd be tied to a law, especially not like this. But maybe my grandfather, Reginald, the man who lost nearly everything to the old world's injustice, would smile if he were alive to see this day. I picked up his old photograph. The picture was faded, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Grandpa, the seed you planted 77 years ago bloomed today." The one-year gala for the foundation was held in a grand hall in Los Angeles. More than 300 people came, former clients we'd helped, attorneys, journalists, and everyday folks who wanted to give. When I walked on stage, the lights flared. In the audience, faces that had once looked hopeless now shone with belief. I didn't say much, just a short story of my journey from ruin to renewal, then ended with a simple line. "The seed my grandfather planted 77 years ago is blooming today. And I believe it will keep spreading in the hearts of those who believe in justice." The crowd stood and applauded so long I couldn't hear my own thanks. All I knew was that, in that moment, what I had lost had become the purpose of my life. That night, after the event, I skipped the duvet party. I quietly returned to the house by the sea where everything began, where I once collapsed, and where I stood up again. The house was different now. No clink of wine, no false laughter, only waves and salt. I sat by the window where our old dinner table once stood and watched the moon drift over the water. I asked myself, if I could erase all that pain, would I? I thought for a long time, then shook my head. No, because pain taught me the true worth of honor, family, and forgiveness. Without that fall, there would be no Reginald Foundation, no hundreds saved, and no me as I am today. I picked up the phone and called Alyssa and Derek. "Are you free this weekend?" "Yes, Dad. What's up?" I smiled. "I'm cooking. No chef, no restaurant. Just family." I heard Alyssa laugh through the phone. Then Derek, "Dad, it's been forever since I've had your pot roast." I set the phone down, my heart light as the breeze. For the first time in years, I felt truly enough. Late at night, the ocean kept breathing, the moon laying a silver road across the water. I sat by the window, fingertips on the cool glass. At 70, I've gone far enough to know the greatest treasure isn't in a safe, it's in a heart that forgives. I closed my eyes and smiled. Justice, at last, had taken root, not only in the law, but in people. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of this road. If my story made you pause for a moment, brought back a memory or a wound, or simply helped you believe that justice still exists, then I didn't tell it in vain. Tell me which city you're listening from, because every comment, every like, every share from you is a heartbeat that keeps someone standing in the face of injustice. Sometimes, one small message from the heart can become a light for someone in the dark. I'm grateful you're here, listening not just to my story, but to a story about faith, compassion, and being human. If you believe truth and kindness still have a place in this world, leave me a small sign, a hello, a heart, or just the words, I believe. And I hope we'll meet again in the next story where justice takes root and the human heart still knows how to love.